Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are doing our series intro. It's a little bit different. We're not doing one book that has multiple volumes. We're doing three distinct standalone volumes from the same creative team that are, I don't even want to say they're connected.
Well, they
thematically,
they're
creatively,
they're
linked.
And the creators refer to them as a trilogy, even though so they think of them as a trilogy, even though they are not direct sequels. They're no crossover characters. There's no
world building across.
It's not the same universe, but they consider it a trilogy. And so what we're talking about is
Memetic,
James Tynion IV and Eryk Donovan's three books, which they call the Apocalyptic Trilogy, which are Memetic, Cognetic, and Eugenic. So they're all from Boom Studios. So they're a spiritual series. And as you read them, it becomes very clear and evident how and why they're linked. You know, the theme is the end of the world. That's what we're talking about now. We're talking about the apocalypse, and we're not talking about the apocalypse in the way that a lot of fiction deals with it, which is a lot of times it's one of two buckets. Either it's about the story of humanity fighting against the apocalypse to prevent it, or it's the story of humanity. The apocalypse happens early in the story,
right.
and it's about the resilience after the fact. But regardless, it's any kind of story about the apocalypse. Humanity, the human race, like we're on that side, right? The audience, right? We are on humanity's side against whatever the apocalypse is. And in these three stories that Tynion and Donovan put together, we talk about not trying to spoil things, but I think it's beneficial in this case. In all three of these stories, we lose. We, humanity, we lose. The world ends. These are books about how the world ends. And I think that's informative going into reading these stories, that there isn't some twist of like, this is how humans come out in the end. This is how they prevail. No, this is how we mess up and die. This is how we end the world. And so that when I first read Memetic, I didn't know any of that. And so there was a bit of a shock of like, oh, this is not the story that I thought it was. And then I had a better appreciation kind of in hindsight, realizing what the story was actually about, which is not about the triumph of the human spirit and the resiliency of humanity. No, forget all of that. This is about how maybe not we're fated or doomed to end, but that at least in some of and really in all three of these books, it's about how easy it would be, or like how simple it could be for I think I would destroy everything.
I would modify that just a little bit to say it's really saying here's one view of humanity. If that's true, this is how it ends.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
and they say there's a little letter in the back that is written in the form of text back and forth, and they're kind of discussing like their own feelings on like, is there a certain inevitability?
That's a Memetic.
Like, are we definitely going to
right?
Yeah. Are we definitely going to wipe each other out? Things like that. And they both kind of say like, no, we're just saying here's one pathway. Like if it were going to happen, here's a pathway that would lead to that.
Yeah, in all three of these books, they take different paths. So Memetic, in the broadest sense, that's it's a weaponized meme. So that's almost like the way that technology, specifically the internet, it can feed into our worst desires as humans. Cognetic is more of a psychological. It's mind control, basically. The idea of the individual versus the collective in terms of thought. And eugenic is very specifically as what you can tell by some of these names here: Memetic, Cognetic, Eugenic. Eugenic is about scientific progress, and gene manipulation and things like that. And how the idea of trying to engineer better humans can lead to the end, though. But I think what's the thing I find fascinating now, looking back on these books, is as we record this right now in late 2023, James Tynion IV is literally the biggest writer in comics. We'll get to him a little more towards the end of the episode when we go into our creator look, our deep dives here. But when these books were first coming out, especially when Memetic was coming out, like Tynion was nowhere near the status he is now. And it's interesting to read his books, especially his creator-owned books, and he's got a lot of them, the ones that have come out in the past 3 or 4 years at most, and look back at something that he started thinking of over 10 years ago and see how some of those ideas still permeate. Because so much of what Tynion does on his creator books, and a little bit he did a little bit of this in his for hire work at DC, was it's always going to have this horror bent to it. You know, there's always some sort of horror bent, whether it's, you know, straight up slasher, gore, psychological, body horror, whatever it is. There's always some kind of horror tinge to it. I think he shares something with that with kind of one of his mentors in this business, who's Scott Snyder at DC. Whenever Snyder does anything on his own creator stuff, you know, American Vampire, Witches,
sure.
Wake, they're all there's some horror tint to it. And he also brought some horror into DC when he was writing on Detective and even on Batman, you know, Dark Knight's Metal, all those things.
And Tynion was on that creative team for New 52 Batman. We'll get to.
He wrote some backups for that, and that's where he got his start. So there's always some level of horror there. And I said you can, reading these now and looking at some of the books he has out now currently, now that he has a much bigger profile, much bigger audience, it's fun to kind of look back and see what some of those connective tissues are. And I think we'll get to that. I think specifically with Memetic, which was the first one out of the gate here. So I guess we'll go real quick here and talk about these 3 books in an overview. Each one of them, Memetic, Cognetic, Eugenic, they're all 3 issues each. But each of those issues are oversized. They're like 40-ish some odd pages. So you get, you know, almost twice an issue. So you get about 6 issues worth of material in the 3 issues. So in the grand scheme of things, the end trade looks, in terms of size and content, as you would any typical 5-6 issue story arc. Memetic came out in 2014. Cognetic came out a year later in 2015, and then Eugenic was 2 years after that in 2017. And the notable thing there is, by the time this actually gets published, Tynion has started his for hire work at DC. He's doing, like I said, he's doing some backup stories on the New 52 Batman, working on some side stories, on some smaller things. And he's doing that during and while Memetic and Cognetic come out. And then in between those two, his profile jumps very high at DC. He takes over the writing on Detective. He ended up co-writing Batwoman, wrote Justice League Dark. This is all happening in like 2016-ish. And then after that happens, then the 3rd volume, Eugenic, comes out when he has a much higher profile. He is much more well-known and starts to have an audience. And also some of his other creator-owned stuff starts coming to the forefront as well. So it's all kind of coming together here as he's building towards like 2016, 2017, 2018 into, I think, maybe like 2020 is when things really started to hit big, to where he became, like, again, the biggest creator in comics. So that's kind of the landscape that these books were born into. And I found a quote here from Tynion. I think this quote was given when Eugenic was about to be published here. It's just talking about the genesis here. And he said, this is quote, "In December 2012, when my comics career was in its infancy, I challenged myself to imagine a kind of horror story that I'd never seen before. And all in one night, 3 bizarre concepts came to mind, and I raced to my computer to start jotting them down in a series of documents that would ultimately become the basis of Eryk Donovan's and mine's Apocalyptic Trilogy." So there it is, this idea that kind of all 3 of these were effectively birthed at the same time. You know, these different takes on the end of the world, these different ways in which the horrors of humanity could end the human race.
Which I think is interesting because it kind of is like, I guess these are all linked in the same way every episode of the Twilight Zone is linked.
I was going to say Twilight Zone, or the more recent one is Black Mirror.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think the difference being, I think a younger writer could have made the mistake of trying to cram all three ideas into one book, which would have been a hot tangled mess. And I think saying, well, I've got three ideas here that are kind of a piece. They're different theories about how humanity could end, and saying, I'm going to make a spiritual trilogy, even though I don't know if anyone will publish it. Because that's kind of a big risk to ask Boom to take on before he has a name. But I think this is kind of the dream scenario for a publisher like Boom, where you sign a guy, he starts doing some work for you, it's great, then his name blows up at the big two, and he's still doing work for you. All of a sudden, you start to see sales go up on this.
Well, and I wonder, because I read these not as a trilogy. Like, I found Memetic, and if you pick up this book, you'll see why. Again, light spoilers. That book's about a weaponized meme, a picture that goes around that destroys the world. And if you see that picture, it's a picture of a sloth giving a thumbs up. It's a fantastic meme. And the reason I picked up and read this book was because I saw that cover and was like, I need to know what that is, which is exactly what happens in the book.
Yep.
That's exactly how the meme spreads. I saw the picture and said, that's ridiculous. I need to read that. And so I picked it up and I saw that it was Tynion, looked it up and realized, oh, it's not just Tynion, it's early Tynion. Oh, well, I got to read this now. I got to see what that's about. And I finished it and didn't know there was anything else. And then browsing titles, I saw another book called Cognetic. I thought, well, that's weird. Memetic, Cognetic. And you see, oh, wait, that's from the same team as well. And when you read that, and in the back of Cognetic, in the back of that trade, there is a letter. I think it's just a letter from Tynion. It might be another back and forth between him and Donovan, but in that he mentions a trilogy, the idea of doing a trilogy, which then sparked in my mind, okay, is there a third one? Did they get to do a third one?
What else ends in ick?
Yeah, exactly. And that's when I saw Eugenic and realized, okay, but I wonder, my point of this is, I wonder what the pitch was to Boom. If the pitch was, I have 3 stories, or the pitch was, I have 1. Because if he just did Memetic, it's fine, because they are standalone, Right. If he just pitched one of these books.
Yeah, no, I think they had an off-ramp each time.
Yeah.
And I think with a young, unknown writer, you want an off-ramp so you don't get committed to a 12-issue run that you're going to have to cancel early. Yeah. And then on the other hand, once he blows up, you want new number ones with his name on it all the time.
Well, yeah.
Which he ended up giving them. So it's like a win-win-win.
Yeah, well,
for everyone involved.
It's also like being at Boom. He had books at Boom, but they weren't adult stories. They weren't horror stories. He had, his books were the ones he had at Boom at the time. Working like the Backstagers, or I don't know if Wind had started yet, but like the Backstagers was that's like an all ages book,
right.
That's not like a middle grade, but it's meant to be a little more wide ranging audience. This is straight up horror. And obviously then he goes into what he's doing now, which is straight up horror and for mature audiences. So there was some relationship there. So maybe I have to think they felt comfortable enough with him. But again, I'm curious if his pitch was, I have 3 ideas, or if it was just like, I'll pitch each one of these individually. And when I pitch the second one, I'll make mention of, it's kind of a spiritual sequel to that other one I did last year. I'd see, I wonder how that ended up working, but regardless, he was able to get all 3 out. And when you read them in succession, when you read them in that order, and we are covering them, by the way, we're going to cover them in release order. So that is Memetic, Cognetic, and then Eugenic. So, that even though again they are standalone stories, always release order, because that's how they were published, and any notes and stuff, any letters in the back of the trades are written from the perspective of, this is the first one out, this is the second one out, this is the last one out. Right. So that's the order that we'll be covering them in. Even though you can theoretically read them in any order, because again, there's no connective tissue other than overall theme.
Yeah. Um, there's so much I want to say about it. First of all, I will say I I had stumbled across Memetic first, the trade, the sloth.
Yeah.
I thought, well, that looks interesting. Boom, generally a label I trust. And then I saw Tynion's name and I was like, wait, how is this on the shelf still?
Yeah.
Because no one cares about it.
At this point,
I was going to save this
9-10 years old. So,
right.
It's older stuff,
Right. I was going to save this comp, but I'm just going to throw it out there now because what I think about, especially having read it, and this is not a spoiler, the sloth with the thumbs up as the meme very much makes me think of the movie Dogma with the Buddy Christ.
Oh, 100%.
The George Carlin Pope rebrands and gets rid of the crucifix for the Buddy Christ.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is, anytime I could talk about Dogma, I'm gonna sneak it in.
Yeah, I've got a little Buddy Christ little statue on my shelf. It's right next to me, actually.
Nice.
But yeah, no, it absolutely, it's the thing about the book. It's the meta thing about the book that I think, I think now when people see it, when they come to it or they find it, what draws you in is the picture of the sloth. And then that brings you into the book, and then you read about the book. And when you read the content, you realize that's what ends humanity. You realize, well, if this were real, I guess I'm part of the problem.
I'd be dead. Yeah,
yeah, I'd be dead. Yeah. So no, that's an interesting way in, and then from there with the other two books, again, they're different angles into the end of the world. But really, none of them are truly as fun as the sloth with the thumbs up. That's about as clever of design work, I think, as you can see, because that's just it's such a perfect internet image,
Yeah.
And it really taps into the current day and age we're in, which we're still in, even as this book is almost 10 years old at this point. We haven't progressed much further than that. And I think that's the one, if there is any kind of progression in these books, that's the one that weirdly is the most grounded, I think, because it's maybe the least fantastical. And then I think Cognetic is a slight step one beyond, because it presumes the existence of, extraterrestrial life, I guess. And then Eugenic is a step beyond that, because now we're talking about like full on like gene manipulation, DNA manipulation, and things like that. So there is a slight progression, I think, in terms of how real this might feel in terms of possibility. Like what's a way the world could possibly end.
It's definitely taking sci-fi license and comic license.
Definitely.
And I think the criticisms that I've read of these books is that it's people are kind of like, hey, we love it, just not quite enough oxygen. Like they could have been longer. You could have expounded more. But I'm like, yes. But they got in and said what they meant to say.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Like they're not trying to build an immersive world. They're trying to plant an idea and say, hey, chew on this for a while.
Yeah. Play it out. Yeah.
And see if you can sleep tonight. After thinking about how the world could end.
I think that is a fair criticism, because again, there are 3 issues, but they're double sized. But even though you get the amount of material as you would, let's say, a 6 issue, you don't have the breaks in it. So you read those issues, these oversized issues, and it can be a little relentless. But again, I agree. I think that is the point. The idea of how quickly this happens, and especially Memetic takes place over 3 days. Like the whole idea is like each issue is a day, and here's how fast the world can end. So it's meant to feel suffocating. I think that there's an intentionality to that. Cognetic happens over the course of a couple of days. Now, Eugenic is different. Eugenic is spread out over a much longer time frame, and each issue kind of jumps between that. So that's the slight outlier in that sense. But yeah, the suffocating nature, it feels intentional, and that could just be a byproduct of them being younger creators earlier in their career, maybe not understanding, not fully getting pacing.
Yeah, I kind of worry about the critics, though. I'm like, do you really want to live in this world longer?
Well,
like,
yeah, but
given what they're doing,
there are some pacing issues. I think I think a little bit in Memetic, but again, the whole idea of Memetic is each one of those issues is one day. So here's what happens in this one day.
Right.
So there's only so much you can do to speed up or slow down time, when the whole point is when you close this thing, it's been 24 hours each issue. So I think there are some things that I in both that and Cognetic. But we'll address those when we get into those issues. I don't think they're detrimental to the book. I'll put it that way. I think they are criticisms. They're things you can note. And I think part of that could be because, again, these are early works by creators. But again, I can sense an intentionality because, yes, it's about the end of the world. It's about careening towards the end of humanity, of society. And so, yeah, do you really need room to breathe, or do you want room to breathe? Do you want your audience to take a breath, or do you want them to feel like they are in it? And that there is no way out. So I think there's some intentionality to it there, and I think there's some bits of maybe they're still getting their sea legs under them for how to really do this on this level. So, but again, I'll touch on some of those things. We'll discuss some of them when we get into those volumes each in their own episode.
Yeah. And they're deserving of their own discussion, which is Definitely. Why we're doing this.
Yeah.
And I do remember, by the way, the text that I got from you a few months ago when you realized all three books were connected.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I have to check this out. I went over. I went to a comic shop, tried to find them, couldn't find them. Was putting something away on my shelf and realized that I did own Cognetic and Memetic because of the Tynion name. I had grabbed them, used for $5 a pop or whatever, and just didn't even process that I had them. So as of this recording, I still have not put my hands on a physical copy of Eugenic, which is strange because I would think that's the largest print number, but I do have it digitally. So
yeah, that's it was probably the largest print because it is the newest one.
With the biggest names attached to it, even though it's the same names as the other two books.
Yeah, they had a bigger profile in 2017. But again, even Tynion's profile from 2017, between 2014 when Memetic came out and 2017 when Eugenic came out, it was a lot bigger then. But it is exponentially bigger now, 6 years after Eugenic came out, because Tynion's career just absolutely skyrocketed. So, but I guess they're. I don't want to get too much more into the books because we'll have.
We got to leave it alone. Yeah,
leave it alone. So,
but we'll say, suffice it to say, Tynion. These are like, if you're a big fan of Tynion's current stuff, whether it's Something's Killing the Children, The Woods, The Closet, anything with a definite article in front.
Yeah,
I think if you really are a student of his work, I don't see any way you can't afford to read these.
I agree. I think these are
the seeds of everything you're going to love about him.
This is similar to when you and I talked about The Nightly News by Jonathan Hickman. Jonathan Hickman, went on to be and still is one of the biggest names in comics. He comes in with the big idea that then he's doing a book right now at Marvel called Gods, which is this absolutely bananas, gigantic cosmic tale that I've read the first issue twice, and I'm still not 100% sure I know what's going on, but his job is to come in and take big swings with big ideas. And when you look at the kind of work he's doing and the kind of things he infuses into his comics, the DNA for all that was laid in that first book in the Nightly News. So if you read his Avenger stuff, his FF stuff, any of his, creator-owned work, the Krakoan X-Men stuff, all of that DNA is baked into what he started, his early work on the Nightly News. And I think it's absolutely similar here with Tynion. If you love his horror work, if you love anything he's put in the last 3 or 4 years, be it a miniseries or an ongoing, I think you'll find the seeds in one of these 3 books, Yeah. And, whether it's the technology aspect, whether it's the little more body horror aspect, whether it's otherworldly aspect to his horror, it's going to come back and draw from one of these earlier books that didn't have the readership that World Tree has now. That Something That's Killing Children has now. One of these bigger books that have launched that have always one of the top sellers when they're released. You're going to see what the origin is if you pick up these 3 books. So yeah, I think they're a must if you're someone who's read. And Tynion's got a loyal fan base. There is maybe no creator that, I don't want to say exploits, but kind of that knows how to use and monetize and get his audience, his specific audience, the things they want and knows what they're willing to pay for and ask for and delivers. No one, I think, does that better than James Tynion IV right now. We'll get to him here at the end. We'll close with looking back on his career because it's a lot right now, but I think we should probably move on and talk about people behind these books here. So yeah, as we mentioned, James Tynion IV, Eryk Donovan, writer and artist on all these books. There is a different colorist on each one of them. Not going to go into all of them now, but we will mention them. The colorist on Memetic is Adam Gazowski. Juan Manuel Tiberius. Not sure to pronounce that. Yeah. He's the color on Cognetic, and D. Cunniff is the colorist on Eugenic. So there is obviously, because the line work is the same, the character work is going to look very similar between all 3 books. There's not a vast difference in terms of color, but I think because of the nature of the type of horror, I can see maybe why they went with slightly different colorists. So it didn't feel the same as if they were supposed to be sequels. One thing they can change is kind of the hues and the palettes and things like that. So there's some slight differences there. But I do think it's interesting that it's almost like maybe they went out of their way to find different colorists, so they didn't seem all the exact same.
Right, because they need to feel like different worlds, which is very difficult when the writing is so similar.
And the lines and colors. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I wonder if they went out of the way to find different colorists who maybe they know and have worked with or hadn't worked with before, simply to give it that slightly different feel, a little bit different edge to it. As to letterers, Memetic and Cognetic were both lettered by Steve Wands, who we talked about back in
Underwater
Welder. Yeah, he is basically Jeff Lemire's personal letterer, and he did a lot of other things, but he always letters Jeff Lemire. And then Eugenic was lettered by Jim Campbell, which we talked about back in Grass Kings. He has done a lot of work for Boom. So
and Boom we talked about in the Grass Kings.
Actually, we did. Yeah. And in the Boom, when we talked about that, we talked about how the rise of Boom in the last 10 years. One of the things that was a big touchstone on that was Something Is Killing the Children, which is the book that Tynion is now biggest and most known for. But I think some of these books here, because it has been in the past like 10 years, Boom is 20 some odd years old now, I think, or getting close to it. So, that first 10 years was about building a foundation. And then these books here are kind of the beginning of that second decade, which has led them and helped build them to where they are now, where I think they are the 4th biggest publisher right now behind Marvel, DC, Image. I don't know if that's true. And actually, you know what? It may not be true, and I don't care if it's not true. It feels that way.
It feels true.
As someone who spends a lot of time online with comics and comics Twitter, who reads a lot of comics, who's in the shops every week, it feels true that Boom has a bigger footprint. Because Dark Horse, IDW, they have, a lot of them have stepped down and they've had to cut some of their lines. Like it's a big deal when IDW loses the Hasbro license. They've stepped down while Boom has maintained and grown, and they brought in bigger names, bigger creators. So it feels like they're at least the 4th biggest publisher.
Yeah, I'd say there's a certain level of subjectivity to which is the biggest. The executive capitalist approach would be just saying who has the most money, but what's getting the most buzz? What are people talking about? What's inspiring, other writers and creators for the next things that will unfold? There's no denying Boom's imprint, and I think there may have even been a stint where Boom jumped into 3rd place. I think there was an Image lull between waiting for Saga to come back, and there were some other things where they were waiting for a tent pole. Boom kind of took off.
Yeah, in terms of cultural cachet, definitely they never jumped. They never jumped Image in terms of sales.
No,
in terms
I don't
of
know
books.
how they could. No,
But in terms of and that was right around, and that was when Something is Killing Children came out, because at that point Image wasn't a lull. They're looking for the next big book. Saga was still away. Walking Dead had ended. Then this horror book hits, and it's the biggest new launch in years. So Boom has, I think they've established themselves now as I guess an alternative to Image, and I guess it really comes down to what the deals are, in terms of what each creator gets paid, how much control they have, just kind of what the contract looks like for each creator. Obviously, in both cases, they're going to own their rights and things like that for adaptation or whatnot. But as a reader, as a consumer, I see them. I don't see them as competitors. Like if it's an Image book or a Boom book, like to me now, I personally don't care.
I see them as slightly different genres too. Like
they have different feels to them, a slightly different feel to them. I think in general, an independent creator-owned superhero type book probably going to end up in Image. Right. Probably not necessarily, but probably. Boom seems to be. I mean, aside from Boom having like an all ages side to them as well, which Image doesn't really have or really care about too much, but Boom has that.
Skybound, I thought. I mean, they have the imprint, right?
Well, yeah, but Skybound is more of is a slightly more mature, little more horror.
Right, it's the other way. Yeah, which is why I'm confused because of Outpost Zero.
Yeah,
which was Skybound and kid friendly.
Which was
a weird pitch
that hurt a little bit when you look at the other books that Skybound specifically puts out. Skybound being that's Robert Kirkman's imprint there. But Boom does have a little more horror-ish to it. Some little bent to it. But I mean, I think one thing I maybe mentioned at some point recently, but Jason Aaron has a book going on right now called Once Upon a Time at the End of the World. I mentioned it with Alex Tefenki because he did the first arc on that. That's a book that easily could have been an Image at some point, but it's at Boom. Why is it at Boom? At this point, it doesn't matter. That was the place he wanted to go, people he wanted to work with, whether it's a relationship thing, it's a contract thing. At this point, I see them as almost equals, but I know there's a level of quality at Boom because their line is still a little more curated. Image is so big and expansive now. Not saying there aren't bad books anywhere, but there are plenty of Image books you can read and be like, that was kind of crap. I didn't like that.
Yeah, I mean, Image is willing to roll the dice on creators
because they're much larger, much more expensive. Yeah. Boom's still a little more curated. And so the books that they put out there, I know there's a level of quality I believe they're going to hit. Because they don't publish as many books, and so they can be a little more stingy, I think, about what they accept, what they want to go with, which creators they want to work with. So, Tynion's one of those guys that he has deals with. He's all over the map. He deals with everyone. So, but I hope he continues to publish things with Boom outside of the Slaughterverse, which we'll get to. But yeah, so that's where we are with Boom right now, and I guess again before we get to Tynion, I guess let's talk a little bit about Eryk Donovan.
Yeah.
These three books, probably the books he's best known for. Not just because you can look back on him being like, wow, he worked with James Tynion in the fourth. But I think these are the biggest books. This idea that he has this spiritual trilogy working together with at the time, an up and coming writer who is now again the biggest writer in the world. But other books, I think you may see him out. You may see him find things in. He has this book called Heavy with writer Max Bendis. It's out of Vault Comics. That's like not a satire. It's kind of a commentary on the Punisher, on that kind of like hardballed, overly masculine assassin kind of thing. It's an interesting book there. Another book that I have no experience with, but it's called Quantum Teams or Go. It's with writer Madeline Visaggio. I was at Black Mask. I think that's kind of a teen punk kind of techno power kind of book there. But those are both series that went on either slightly ongoing or slightly more little mini series ish. I guess important to these books is he did a couple issues of Hellblazer. which I guess may have been called, it might have been called John Constantine : Hellblazer at this point. But that's where he, I think, first worked with Tynion, because James Tynion was co-writing those issues of Hellblazer at the time. This is probably 2011, 2012, something like that. So early on. And that, I think, is where Tynion and Donovan first met, and then, decided then to start working on their own thing going from there. Obviously, he's got like any artist, he's got a lot of variant covers. Well, he got a lot of covers in general, variant or main, for mostly like Boom and Image, a lot of creator owned stuff. A lot of things, a lot of books, just wide ranging, just, working on a cover, putting something out for either a friend or for hire, or however it goes. Also did a short story with Tynion, which I think this is after Hellblazer, and probably while they're working on Memetic. A little short story called In the Dark, which was a horror anthology that IDW put out back in 2014. Their short story was called Why So Sad. I have not read that. I picked it up at some point. I like reading a good anthology. I just read a noir anthology that IDW put out a couple years ago. So anytime you get someone like that, you get some big time creators, in this case, maybe before they were big time, writing a nice little like 8-10 page short story, always something pretty cool. And then finally, last thing I have on Donovan is a book that I want to try and find, only for the local aspect of it.
The title, Ghosts of Ohio.
Yeah. Well, not just the title, but it's a book. Yeah, it's called The Ghosts of Ohio. And he did that book with the writer was a guy named Andy Biersack, who is, I guess, a local kid out of Cincinnati. He is a musician. I guess he's in a band called the Black Veil Brides, and he has some solo work as well, I guess. And but this is a story about a ghost in southwest Ohio here. That I guess he did this comic as kind of a companion to an album of the same name, called the Ghost of Ohio. It's very yes. It's very My Chemical Romance.
Yep.
Why
is his name escaping us?
It's Jared Way. It's Jared Way.
Yes.
Yeah, Jared Way. And it's the True Lies, the Fabulous Killjoys. And then the album was called Danger Days, True Lies of the Fabulous Killjoys. But that kind of collab there. But because this is supposed to be a story, a ghost story set in our neck of the woods, that was out by Z2 Comics. Not a huge publisher, but Z2 does a lot of specifically musician and comic adaptations or collaborations, I guess. They just put out a graphic album based on Tori Amos's Little Earthquakes, which was like Eisner nominated this past year. It's supposed to be really, really good. So that's the kind of thing that Z2 does. But I want to try to track down this book, Ghosts of Ohio, just because I'm curious about it. No one can, just given the local angle. And
I've got to think we're in the optimal position for locating it. Like if it's sold well outside of Southwest Ohio, I'd be a little shocked.
Yeah, no offense. It's the kind of book that I feel that we should be able to stumble across at one of the smaller local bookstores. Like right. There's always the local interest area section or local authors or something like that. I feel like it put a little bit of legwork, probably run into that one on accident, but I want to find that one and read it. Just A, the local angle, and B, it's another work by Eryk Donovan. I like his character work. I like the work that you see in what he does in the Apocalyptic Trilogy here. So I'd be interested to see how that translates into an actual literal ghost story. So,
yeah, I'm sold on it. If we get him on the podcast, we'll do Ghost of Ohio.
Yeah.
Even though I think that's a little out of each of our wheelhouses in terms of genre, but
it is. But I mean, again,
I'm flexible.
I'm not specifically a horror reader in general. I don't consume horror content outside of comics, and I'm very limited in my horror consumption, even in comics. For me, it all comes down to who's doing the book,
who's
writing it, who's
the way I'd say it is, I never go out of my way for it.
Exactly.
And, we were just talking on the Pluto cast. I can't remember if it's on the podcast or right before it, but there was a manga writer that I really enjoyed their first work that was a mystery piece, and now they've come out with like this mystery / horror thing, and I'm gonna read it because I'm like in on that author now. but I'm like, that's how I end up drifting into horror is when, or we're like, Jeff Lemire's new obsession with horror.
Yeah.
Gideon Falls
not new.
was,
he's
he's always had a little touch of it, but he's
I think
doing
it's him
like
and Sorrentino
horror
together.
now.
When him and Sorrentino get together, they well, and what you mentioned is that I'm very similar. I don't go out of my way for horror, which is how I missed the boat initially on Something Is Killing the Children. It was like I knew Tynion. I'd read his stuff. I'd read his DC stuff. And when that book launched, I remember seeing it. And I remember picking up that first issue and being like, oh, that's interesting. It's a horror book. That's cool. Put it back on the shelf. Check back in a few months later. And the first issue was sold like 2 million copies or something like that a couple years after that. It's like one of the biggest launches and biggest franchises in comics. And it's like, oh, missed the boat on that one.
Yeah, luckily I had a friend buy me the first issue and be like, this is awesome, you got to read it. And I was like, yeah, I'll put it on the stack. And it's just sitting there, and it was the variant, which I think was Frizzen.
Okay.
That I was like, wow, that cost me about $80 because you decided to buy me the variant instead of the A cover, but whatever. I feel bad selling it either way. But I remember that I reached out to you this well before we were podcasting together. When he took over on the Batman run, I was like, didn't really know him other than I had read some of his detective comics. It was such a large creative team that I wasn't honed in on any one particular name, even though he was the main guy. Yeah. Then there was a Comixology sale with The Woods, and I was like, oh, that's our guy Tynion. So I texted or messaged you or something and said, hey, what do you know about The Woods? And you were like, if you like horror, I'm sure it's great. And I think that was it. I was like, okay, not a strong endorsement from the new Batman writer, and I don't really like horror. But the art, it looked like a cool series. Mm-hmm. It had a good run, and I still have not picked it up, even though I may have ended up grabbing it for a $1.99 a trade or something in that crazy Comixology sale.
Yeah, I mean, that's
that gave me your impression of Tynion's work, which is like, if that's your genre, I'm sure it will be excellent.
You're going to be in. Yeah. No, and The Woods is one that I have not gone back and read yet that I still want to, because I've read so much more since then. Because now, because he falls into that category with like Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino, where if they put a book out, even if it's horror, like I'm going to read it, I'm going to try it. I don't care if it's horror now. That I'm post genre with him as a writer.
Yeah.
Because not all the stuff is horror. I mean, the stuff has horror bent to it, but it's that they're different kinds. We'll transition this right now. This is the list of the books that James Tynion IV has that are listed as ongoing, in which he is the writer. All right, these are the that are going right now. So at Boom, he has Something Is Killing the Children, where he is the main writer on, and then there's a spin-off, The House of Slaughter, and then the whole Slaughterverse. He doesn't write every single one of those, but he's involved with the story with all of them. Story, maybe the overall plot, and then he has friends and stuff he works that at least writes House of Slaughter. At DC, he has the Sandman universe, Nightmare Country, which is now has now a second series, which is now Nightmare Country / the Glass House, but that is still ongoing. That's a DC. At Image, he has the Department of Truth with Martin Simons and World Tree with Fernando Blanco. And then at his own, this was through his Substack, his Tiny Onion Substack, but the books are being they're being printed in physical copy at Dark Horse. It's Blue Book with Michael Oeming, which is an alien based on true tales of quote unquote true accounts of alien abduction, and then the Oddly Pedestrian Life of Christopher Chaos. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4.
I didn't even know Christopher Chaos was still going.
Yeah, that's an ongoing book all at Dark Horse. So that's 6 books where he is the main writer on, plus him shepherding the rest of the Slaughterverse, which is his own created larger franchise book. So that's just what he has going right now. That's ongoing. And that doesn't even count something like a book at a Black Label book at DC, Nice House on the Lake, which I think was just a 12-issue series, at least initially.
6, yeah.
I think it was 12, with the idea that like it's possible maybe he has more stories there. So like that could come back, maybe not as an ongoing, but like as an ongoing miniseries. Like there could be like a volume 2 for something like that. Like the Closet was just a 3-issue series at Image, so that there are things he has. Oh, and I forgot, he has another book at Image, which is the Universal Monsters. He's doing a Dracula book. I think it's an ongoing, or maybe it's a small mini series. That's with Martin Simons, the same guy he does the Department of Truth with. That isn't come out yet. That's about to come out. So we're about to throw another book onto the ongoing pile of what he has going. So I said all these books are last few years.
And every year when the Eisners roll around, he's got a guaranteed spot for at least one award. And you think, man, he must be really good. On the other hand, he's writing about 10% of the weekly new release shelf on it. I don't know if his goal is to have a new book come out of some kind every single week of the year. But if you buy that many tickets, your chances in the lottery go up. That being said, that's not to take anything away from him. He is writing a quality that is award worthy. But I think we're now at the point where it's unfair that he wins one every year. They just need to come up with the Tynion Award in the Eisners and give it to their favorite Tynion book of the year.
Well, he's not there yet. He's almost there. So Tynion is the 3-time consecutive Eisner winner for Best Writer. He's won in 2021, 2022, and just won early this year in 2023. The Eisner started in 1988, and in that time, 16 writers have won Best Writer. Alan Moore is 9, which makes a whole lot of sense. And one time he won 3 in a row. So of his 9 wins, 3 of those came consecutive. Next on the list, Brian K. Vaughan has 4, never won 3 in a row. And Neil Gaiman also has 4 wins, but he won all of his 4. He won his 4 consecutively. So Tynion still has that to look forward to. Then is Tynion with 3, and he's tied with Ed Brubaker, who also has 3 wins for Best Writer, who he didn't win 3 in a row. And after those 5 names, Alan Moore, Brian K. Vaughan, Neil Gaiman, Ed Brubaker, and now James Tynion the 4th, the only other writers to have multiple wins are Brian Michael Bendis, who has 2, and Tom King, who has 2. And one of Tom King's years, he was a tie. He tied with Marjorie Liu. So in the history of the best Eisner, the Eisner for Best Writer, like Tynion is already up there with the literal biggest names in comics in the past 40 years.
And he's 35 years old.
Yeah.
At the time of this recording, I believe.
Yeah.
But
he's still,
and that's not counting. I mean, those are just Best Writer Eisners, right? He's also got Best Continuing Series, Best New Series. He's always in almost every category that he's qualifies for. Whatever he's working on just makes the list.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no reason to think that next year he won't be at least nominated. He'll have Something Has Killed the Children definitely still going on. World Tree, which is fantastic. Christopher Chaos will be out. I don't know when the next issue of Department of Truth will come out. But yeah, I mean, and he'll have the Universal Monsters. He'll have that Dracula book out for next year as well. So there's no reason to think he at least won't be nominated again. Whether or not he wins 4 in a row and then ties Gaiman's record for that is yet to be seen. But I at this point, I wouldn't put against them, because you got to remember too, the Eisners, they're not fan votes. There's not some random academy. I guess it's similar to that. It's comic professionals. So it's people who make comics, who distribute them, who sell them, who work at all levels of the comic industry. These are his peers that are looking at his work and being like, nope, you're the best. We think you've done the best job this year. And they've said that 3 years in a row. Which is wild that in a time now when comics are as good as they've ever been, and the production is so high and the quality is so high. And it's not just that the quality is high. There are more great books than I think ever. There are also probably more bad books too, because there's just more books in general. But the end result is there are more great books.
I do hear curmudgeonly guys my age, who grew up reading comics, and they're like, everything's junk right now. And I'm like, what are you reading? Like, I think if you've confined yourself to the big 2 and you are just like, an ongoing reader for, the biggest names like Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, and you are just trying to follow those characters. It's been a turbulent decade or two because all of the reboots, all the numbering. Right now, like our shop has a Batman section with I think some people feel that dilutes the quality to say, oh, there are 9 Batman books right now. I'm like, but the Batman title itself is still going, and it's generally been pretty strong.
I disagree with that. I think the people who are like that think that because it's not about the reboots and the renumbering and all that. It's that they want comics to be the way that they were when they remembered them. They want them to look and sound and be like that. So it's not about the quality of the book,
right? And they don't want it to evolve.
It's the content of the book that they just don't like, and those are the kind of people that definitely don't read any creator-owned books. Those people are the ones who complain about that. Because you talk about people your age. I'm your age. I'm older than you are. The people my age who are like, comics are terrible now. They're all they complain about comics being woke. They complain about comics being
what I did
inclusive.
To the last person. Someone complained to me about comics being woke. I feel bad about this. I gave them the Flintstones by Mark Russell.
Yeah, that's what you should do. That's what you should do.
I was read this. You'll think Marvel and DC are soft compared to the Flintstones.
Or you just give him that issue of Captain America #1 where he's literally punching Hitler when we weren't even in the war yet. So this idea that comics are
that is a new thing for them to be socially aware. Yeah.
So, but it is. Comics now I think are better than they've ever been, and yet because the output is there, and in some ways that hurts the industry because there are so many books out. There's a dilution of the market, not of quality, of the market, because how can I think about this actually in terms of like television. I mean, you think about how a TV show back in the day would get like 30-40 million viewers or something like that, right. And if it got down to it only got like 12 million viewers, so they got canceled, because no one was watching it, and if a broadcast show now had those numbers, it'd be the biggest show in 10 years, because there are so many more choices. The market's
so fragmented.
Exactly. Yeah. That doesn't mean quality has gone down, but the attention span is still finite. And so that's a balancing point, I think, for all kinds of media. But I think comics has this problem there because of how shops have to order books, and you have to order things before you even know what the audience is going to actually be for buy it, and then the people who are going to buy stuff, like a new #1 for a book written by James Tynion IV, they're going to buy a whole lot of those, and people are going to buy a lot of those variant covers. But how many of them come back for issue 2, 3, or 4? And this is when I kind of talked about what Tynion has done, kind of gaming the system. He sells a lot of variant covers directly through his site, through Tiny Onion, because he knows his audience wants that. He sells them directly at conventions. And I mean, I remember I saw Tynion at a show. I saw him in Baltimore Comic-Con in 2018 or 2017. Sorry, 2017. So probably just as I think it would have been just before Eugenic came out. Like no line. You walk up there. He had done some stuff. He had just started doing detective comics during Rebirth. He had co-written and did some backup stuff for the Dark Knights Metal stuff that Snyder was doing. Wasn't a huge name. Fast forward to I saw him at Orlando MegaCon in 2022. Had to get in line at 9:00 for his signing at 11. And I was the first person in line because if I hadn't been by 11, by like 10:00, his line was capped. He wasn't even there yet, but his line had been capped because people were showing up. They wanted to be there. They wanted to get his signature. They wanted to buy his stuff. He had convention exclusive, or maybe not convention exclusive. They might've been fan club exclusive variant covers. And each day the show was there, they had a different one available each day, and people showed up and they bought that cover because they had to get it, to the point where this was day 2 when I was there on Friday when I was in line. The guy working the guy working Tynion's booth there was like, all right, it's the cover. I think it was a Department of Truth cover. It was like, this is the one that's for today, but I have too many copies of the one from yesterday. So if you want to buy today's, you have to buy yesterday's too. Like he told people in line.
Yeah.
And I think it might've been like $40 each. And like, if you want to buy today's, you have to buy yesterday's cover. And not a single person blinked. Like, yeah, cool, I'll take it. Like
that sounds right.
They didn't matter. And that's the kind of fan base that Tynion has.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I do think some of that type of hype is driven by like how crazy the speculator market is over Tynion. If at least a quarter of the stuff went on eBay.
Yes, it is, but the
correlation between his loyalties and his fans and
but thing is, it's like you can sell this stuff on eBay, but like, why do that when you can go to Tiny Onion and just buy directly from Tynion? Like that's right. Part of it too. Like the part of the speculator market is going to a shop and trying to get the book that no one else has for $4. You can or even like $10, the variant cover that no one else has. It's like a 125, 1 in 100. So you can sell that because it's about scarcity. If you can buy directly from the creator, from the artist.
No, I'm talking about the convention exclusives though.
Yeah, well, that's why I don't think they were convention exclusives exactly, but they were being sold at the convention. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there is a heavy speculative market. But I think again, a lot of Tynion's fan bases, they want his stuff. They want to say they have all of his stuff because you can. Yeah, I'm sure you can go online and you can try to. Go to eBay. You can get some of these covers and pay an exorbitant price for it. I said, or you can just go and buy directly from him. It's still going to be $40 or whatever it is, but better that than like maybe 150 that I'm sure someone's trying to sell for something like that. But yeah, he knows that his fan base, his audience is going to buy these books because this is the thing that they want. And it's not specific to his reader base. But it's almost kind of like a self-selecting thing, the kind of people that read Tynion's work that would obsess over it are kind of the people those collectors that want the exclusive covers. They want the specialty things. They want to be part of that in group. They don't want to be selling them. They want them for themselves. And so he caters to that, and he knows his audience is willing to do that, and that they not just willing to, but they ask for it. That's what they want out of it. And that's a different readership than some other authors, and someone like a Tom King or a Jeff Lemire or something like that, or Brubaker and Phillips. That audience is less inclined to want those things from their creators. But yet Tynion's audience craves that. And he gives that to them. And he is one of the few creators that is able to walk that variant cover line, because it's almost like he's serving directly to his audience, as opposed to putting out a bunch of variants for anybody to try to hunt down and order and find. He's putting out the ones that are being sold are being marketed basically directly to the people that want to buy them. It's like he's figured that part out, and that's not something that every creator can do, but it's something that he can do because of his specific audience.
Yeah. Now I meant to ask about this before we started recording, but at one point, he had threatened to pull out from every publisher and just sell on Substack.
Yeah.
But it seems like he never really, I mean, lots of artists and writers have ongoing Substacks, but none of them I don't think are exclusive to Substack.
No. Well, I some of them maybe, but that pipe dream went away because when that happened, that was 2021, something like that. Substack was throwing out all these deals, big money deals to comic creators. Their Substack Pro, which basically subsidized them for a year to go and put out and do whatever they wanted. And then the question was, well, after that year runs out and that grant money runs out, what happens next? And a lot of those that produce comics on those deals, they've gone away, and they've taken those books to Image or Boom, or in Tynion's case, like Dark Horse or something like that. They've taken them somewhere else to continue publishing them, and their Substacks are now just just the newsletter that so many people put out, maybe a post here or there. They're not creating on Substack as much anymore because the money isn't there. So yeah, that was never going to be a dream. It's a reality. But Tynion's one of the few that could have supported it. It's like being on Substack or something like that. It's like a souped up version of Patreon. Like
you're asking, absolutely what it is. I mean,
yeah.
and there are writers who have made it work for particular series, because I believe all of Love Everlasting was published on Substack and now is being reprinted by DC.
Well, no, it's an Image book,
or Image, whatever.
And not all of it. It was the first 7 issues.
Okay,
and now it's ongoing, but it's only at Image. Black Cloak, which was Kelly Thompson on her Substack with Meredith McLaren. The first arc was published on Substack and has now been reprinted at Image. And then they're currently on a break right now because they're going to keep going, but it'll be at Image. But the issues won't be all those issues were pretty oversized. They're not going to be as big because they don't have the money for it that they had from Substack. So it just that money just isn't there. It doesn't continue to be there. So it's not a sustainable model, even though, so many comic creators went and started that. It's not there for them to keep going. But if anyone could do it, it could be Tynion, because he could mobilize his audience in that way if this was the only way in which you could get a book from him. But like I said, even those books, Blue Book, Christopher Chaos, they're coming out in print on through Dark Horse. So a lot of those books find a life in print outside of just digital delivery through Substack, because people still want physical copies, and even if that's just a collection, forget single issues. It could be single issues, it could be not. People still want a physical copy. They want to have something they can either put in a box on a shelf or something like that. There's just there's always an appetite for that, and so there's always going to be more of a market there than there is just sending things out to your fan base. So which is why I don't think series can be supported in that way, but selling merch, selling variant covers, pins,
sure.
Something That's Killing Children has got a ton of merch to it, ton of great merch. People eat that stuff up, selling that stuff directly to readers, selling variant covers to any of your series directly. That stuff is more sustainable than like, hey, you need to keep paying for this book so this comic can come out every month. That's a lot harder sell.
Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to cover with Tynion? I feel like we've gone deep on some aspects of him and haven't exhausted him entirely yet.
No,
but, I mean, we've also got 3 more episodes to talk about him and his work. And
the last thing I'll say is just, I'm going to throw some names out there, comics, other things that he has written that are done that you should probably, maybe want to check out at Boom. Outside of Something That's Killing the Children in the Slaughterverse, you can check out Wind, The Backstagers of the Woods. Those are his biggest books over there. At Image, again, outside of Department of Truth and World Tree, there was The Closet, which I mentioned, a little 3-issue miniseries. At DC, pretty much any Batman in the past decade, he had some hand in. Batman, Detective, Justice League Dark, Batwoman, all sorts of stuff in there. He played a major role in the Bat Office in the Gotham world for 5 or 6 years there, up until him kind of leaving DC exclusive. Also Batman TMNT. He did 2 crossovers with Batman and Ninja Turtles, which really were a lot of fun. If you're a Ninja Turtle fan, those were fun books to read. I think you can tell that Tynion obviously grew up with the Turtles, has an affinity for them. Those were really fun books. I also mentioned that Hellblazer run, Constantine Hellblazer, and Nice House on the Lake, which was that's technically a Black Label book. That's not superhero stuff. That easily could have been another book at Boom or at Image or something like that. Again, it's got a horror bent to it, and it would have fit in perfectly with any of his other creator-owned books. That one has happened to be at DC and through Black Label. So really, like I said, there are so many books that Tynion has out. That's it. There is a reason why he is the biggest writer in comics right now, and arguably one of the busiest writers. Again, I don't know how he has time to do as much as he does with the artists that he works with and the publishers he works with. There's so much.
And his con circuit, right? He's also out there selling variants and merch and being at at least the big cons. He's always there.
Because he is one of the biggest draws. He is now one of the biggest draws at a con. And if he's set up there, oftentimes, he'll be set up with some of the artists that he works with. Like when I saw him in Orlando a couple years ago, he was set up there with Martin Simons, who he does Department of Truth with, Werther Dell'Edera, who does Somebody's Killing Children with, and the artist who I am blanking on right now who did Nice House on the Lake.
I didn't read that book.
Harold Loop. I don't want to go off. I don't have it right now, and I can't find it. But it was Tynion and his three artists right there. Three artists that he worked with currently. That were tabled right next to each other. So you could get in line for one, and you can work your way down the line and get all of them. And it's a huge draw. And he is one of the biggest names. And if you're at whatever, San Diego, New York, Chicago, any of these big major cons, he's going to be a draw. And all of that's happened relatively quickly in the past like 3 or 4 years, where he has gone from a new name in comics to the next big thing in comics to actually being the big thing in comics. I think it's pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to really diving into this early work and seeing how these early works tie into the books he has out now, his recent books. Because I can see not a 1-to-1, but looking at Memetic, Cognetic, and Eugenic, each one of those and what the vibe is, what the overall theme is, I can find pretty damn close to a cousin book or a sister book to a current book he's doing now. Each one of those, each one of those has a at least like it'd be like a nice double feature with, as opposed to looking at three books as a trilogy. If we took each one of them separately and paired it with one of his current books or recent books, I think there's a nice double feature there. But we'll get into that when we get into each one of these books in the next few weeks.
All right. Well, you can follow us on all the socials, and you can find all of those at storiedarcs.com. You've listened to this much, so hopefully you will go pick up from your library, Hoopla, your comic shop. If you have to, Amazon or wherever, pick up Memetic, and we will see you here next week with that Happy Sloth Times, which I think will be the hashtag for the episode.
Probably.
Yeah. Probably. So we'll try to make that a thing on whatever dystopian landscape of social
media. Sharing that meme, nothing has ever gone wrong with that, because that's definitely not what the story's about.
That's definitely not the point of the story. So definitely, once you've seen it though, you might as well retweet and enjoy the happy song.
That is true, because at that point you're pot committed. So
yep. Okay, so just look ahead, make sure you're grabbing Memetic, Cognetic, and Eugenic in that order, and we will see you here next week for the Memetic discussion.
Peace.